You have failed me for the last time.
Jedi Fallen Order looks great, and gamers, the people who actually care about games, should be excited, but EA? Well, let's just say I'd imagine they're running through their depends right about now. And the best part is, due to their own stupidity, EA had no choice but to let this happen. We're getting more and more information by the day about Respawn's Jedi Fallen Order, and what is probably most surprising is that almost none of it is the typical EA nastiness we've grown to expect from the publisher. So far, EA's exclusive handling of the Star Wars license has been a total and absolute catastrophe from almost every perspective. But for once, there's a reason to be hopeful. I normally do this middle finger series about games that shed industry trends, and Jedi Fallen Order seems to be doing that, but today we have a game from the same people that made this. And this, Jedi Fallen Order, is a middle finger to EA. So in this piece, I want to talk about exactly why EA was forced to allow this game to happen, and why they got to this point, but maybe more importantly, why it might be the game that changes everything about the way EA pretends to operate. But it all starts, unsurprisingly, with Battlefront. Star Wars Battlefront 2 is viewed by most gamers as maybe the biggest disaster in modern gaming, but what those people usually forget is that it was a sequel to an equally disastrous outing. From the moment EA got their hands on a Star Wars license, a 10-year deal, by the way, from Disney, they decided they were going to make games built strictly around the opportunity for monetization, and far worse yet, games that they felt anybody could feel like a winner playing. In the process, they created the first Battlefront game, well, the reboot, to be a giant, hey look I'm pretty simulator. The game was laughably shallow in every way, intentionally so to allow just about anybody to get their hands on it and feel good. From its lottery-based hero mechanics to its total depletion of content, it was a $60 parody of what Star Wars Battlefront used to be. So in response, EA went, gosh, we actually have to make a game with a sequel. That's going to take money, so we better gouge our customers to ensure we keep that bottom line pretty. And boy, did they ever. EA quickly became the Darth Maul of Star Wars gaming. I'm not going to bore you with the details of one of the most covered controversies of this generation, but there's something important to note here. Gamers finally spoke. Sales were disappointing, the game's player count dwindled rapidly, the response was literally national news, and EA was vilified to the point where it's reported that Disney had to step in and force EA to remove the launch loot boxes. Even if EA would eventually claim the removal was only temporary. And this is important, because this generation, EA hasn't just cannibalized Star Wars, but they've turned every single one of their franchises into an always-online multiplayer money-first charade. Titanfall was next, but this is also where Respawn and Fallen Order come into play, because what happened around this catastrophe is probably the only reason EA greenlit Fallen Order. I have an entirely separate video about this, so I'm not going to go too far into detail, but there is substantial evidence that EA tried to intentionally cannibalize the sales of Titanfall 2 in an effort to lower the value of Respawn and purchase them in a cheaper and more vulnerable state. Titanfall 2 was one of the most mismarketed, mishandled, and strangely released games of all time, let alone this generation. EA used it as bait. EA used the franchise as a way to eat into the sales of Call of Duty and in a way to clear some market share for Battlefield. It was a mess. But Titanfall 2 was also one of the best games of this generation, and in turn it also flopped commercially. Once EA succeeded in purchasing Respawn after this fiasco, they immediately moved on to correcting their mistakes and started work on Titanfall 3. No, just kidding. They used the Titanfall universe even further to create a battle royale game with enormous monetization opportunities. Apex Legends is a good game. They didn't use Titanfall's name to create some Frankenstein's monster of the franchise, but it isn't Titanfall, and it's clear the work on this game took the focus off of the franchise proper. Meanwhile, a Respawn team got to work on their first Star Wars game, but only because EA had no choice but to give gamers something different. And we'll get to that in a second. I just want to substantiate this point a little further. What EA did to Titanfall and Battlefront is exactly what they did with Need for Speed this generation. It's exactly what they did to Mass Effect. It's exactly what they did to Dead Space. It's exactly what they did to BioWare with Anthem. The point is, Respawn was caught in a cycle of bastardization that removed the element of art and passion from the projects their publisher would rule over and forced them down a path that their studio had never been exposed to, having their project be entirely at the mercy of a publisher that not only did not have their best interests at heart, but also had the power to shut them down. But Respawn got lucky. After Need for Speed's failures, after Battlefront's failures, after Dead Space's failures, after Mass Effect's failures, EA knew they only had one option. Fallen Order seems to only exist because EA understands that they pushed gamers too far, and they're nearing their last strike. EA had to come out and say, we've got a single-player-only Star Wars story-based game, because anything else would have ended in revolts. And in parts, they probably feel like this will give them a free pass in the future. Hey, I know this game doesn't do what you want it to, but look, we gave you Jedi Fallen Order. But if it succeeds, their business plan kind of falls apart. Let me explain. Jedi Fallen Order is a single-player only game that has no microtransactions. And according to Respawn, at no point in time will those statements ever change in factuality. Let that sink in. EA is publishing a game with no multiplayer and no microtransactions in 2019. So let's cover that one at a time. EA's original marketing and gameplay demo of Jedi Fallen Order were almost strangely mediocre, and apparently not at all indicative of what the game was actually going to be. Now, I'm not claiming that they're going to cannibalize this the way they clearly did with Titanfall 2, but it's worth pointing out that its first showing was this single-player game with light exploration elements and almost Force Unleashed-esque lightsaber combat. They showed a game that was very linear and essentially narrow. And yet, come to find out just a couple weeks before launch, that is not at all what the game is. It's now clear that Fallen Order is substantially less generic than it had seemed. Instead, it's this non-linear, play-it-your-way, narrative-driven experience that allows you to go to planets in any order and allows you to explore its Metroidvania-esque world at your pace. There are upgrades, unlockables, all in-game, a game that is much more open and far more unique in its blending of Star Wars and video games than the game had originally seemed. EA has always said that they add multiplayer and microtransactions because gamers want them, and games without them aren't as profitable and are less interesting to gamers because they lack long-term intrigue. Gamers, according to EA, want a service. They want to constantly be in the game for years at a time, Anthem's 10-year plan. So what then does happen if Jedi Fallen Order succeeds? Well, from a single-player standpoint, EA's multiplayer theory, or more accurately, excuse, goes out the window. EA's disingenuous reasoning for forcing every franchise to be multiplayer first and treating narrative and single player as an afterthought like they did with Battlefront 2 will be exposed as just that. A disingenuous attempt to eke more money out of already profitable products. EA will have no excuse for canceling single-player games. EA will have no excuse for destroying their single-player franchises. EA will have to either admit that they're not okay with making a profit, they need ultimate greed, or they'll actually have to give gamers what they want. So, what about Jedi Fallen Order's monetization? There is no room to monetize single-player-only games, despite what Ubisoft has spent a generation trying to condition us to believe. Look at God of War. That game is as self-contained as a game could possibly be. There isn't even DLC for the game. It came out, it worked, and it was done. That was what it was and all it would ever be. It was, incidentally and probably coincidentally, almost an ode to a generation of gaming past. Respawn says that's exactly what Fallen Order will be as well. So what does that mean for the game? Well, a few things. First off, that means that the game's quality is going to dictate its sales. You'd think that would go for any game, but as Anthem's millions of sales and Battlefront's long life have shown us, that's not always true. If Fallen Order is bad, people will not buy it outside of its initial install base. It will have a very short shelf life, and it won't make money. So EA has no choice but to give Respawn the resources and time they need to actually finish the game before it comes out. There are no second chances with single-player only releases. This also means that the game's shelf life will be entirely dependent on how much content EA allowed Respawn the time, and again resources, to create. With no microtransactions, word of mouth is their only moneymaker, and that only comes if people aren't finishing the game in 24 hours. But again, what happens if Fallen Order succeeds? What happens if gamers go out and they support the product they've actually been asking for? Well, it's quite simple. EA loses the leverage to make excuses for their current monetization approach. I think what must scare EA the most about Fallen Order's potential success is that they can never again, if this game succeeds, pretend like their games need microtransactions. They'll never have an excuse for implementing them in $60 releases, and better yet, they'll in all likelihood have no choice but to back down a bit with how they approach these things. It would have, for example, been real hard to justify shuttering Visceral and ending the Dead Space franchise if a single-player, new IP, story-driven game had just recently lit up the charts from one of their own studios. And these things should also give you hope for Jedi Fallen Order. As much as I wanted to write a short oral history of EA's current position in the industry, I also want to do something I've never done. I want to encourage you to actually consider how you approach purchasing Jedi Fallen Order. Out of principle, it's easy to ignore anything EA has their name on, and it's possible the game won't be any good at all, but it's also worth pointing out that unfortunately, we can't stop EA from eating up our favorite franchises, but we can at least show them that when they actually treat gamers and their games with respect, they might actually be rewarded for it. And it's also worth pointing out that given the fact that this game is going to have to rely on its critical success, it's going to have to rely on its quality, it's going to only make money if it's good, and most importantly, finished, for once, maybe we should have a little hope in a product coming out of EA's stable. And it's worth pointing out that Respawn has never given us a reason not to trust them with single-player games. Respawn has always been worth supporting, at least pre-Apex Legends. And given that Titanfall 2's campaign was one of the best I played this gen, I have a little faith. And I know, it's EA, I could never. Well, I just want to say this: speaking of voting with your wallet doesn't always mean keeping it closed. It can also mean opening it when there's a product that's actually worth supporting. Obviously, this is a double-edged sword. What I really want, me personally, is a Respawn that's free of EA's clutches. What I really want is EA to lose the exclusive license to Star Wars altogether and see what other devs and publishers can bring to life within that universe. But I know I cannot have those things. At least, however, I can reward Respawn for being the one bright shining light in a sea of EA's filth. I am not, let me be clear, asking you to buy the game. All I'm asking is that when you consider this purchase, consider that your dollar, however you choose to use it, says something. And that goes both ways. You're totally justified in not purchasing it. Maybe this game will fail, and that straw will break EA's back and Disney will rip the license away. But unfortunately, I think that's unlikely. I'm excited, on the other hand, to actually consider buying a Star Wars game again, and I'm excited that it might actually be worth my money. And that maybe this game's success will lead to EA finally understanding that gamers do in fact know what they want. I just want to take control back over what we're given by these companies. Maybe supporting quality is a good place to start. That's it for today's video, but now I want to know what you guys think. It'll be interesting to see how this game does commercially, because I know a lot of people who justifiably and definitely rightly so don't want anything to do with this release simply because it's an EA product, and that makes a lot of sense. But I know a lot of people that feel the way I feel and are giving this game a chance, that have a little bit of hope that maybe Respawn can kind of overwhelm EA's influence and do something special here. Are you going to buy this game? Are you interested in it at all? What have you seen? What haven't you seen that makes you want to or not want to purchase it? And I think my most important question is, who, other than an EA studio, would you actually want to see make a Star Wars game? Would you want to see one of Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed teams do it? Would you want to see it come from Activision? Who would you want to see make a Star Wars game? Let me know down below. As always, if you enjoyed this video, hit that like button. If you're not yet subscribed, press subscribe down below. Also, next to the subscribe button is a little bell. If you press that, that'll actually make sure you're notified when a video comes out. That's all it does. It just makes sure that you actually know when I upload a video. So press that little bell next to the subscribe button. And until next time, guys, I'm out.